All right, I think we'll get started and a couple more people will probably trickle in as we start. Aaron, could you flip to the next slide for me? Great. So thanks everyone for coming today. We are doing a security aware webinar this month. And in August, we will be doing a Microsoft 365 Cloud Tools training. You will get a registration link in the follow-up email after today's webinar. So if that is a topic that interests you, we hope that you'll register for that and join us on August 24th for that webinar. For anyone who has a question during today's presentation, the Q&A button in Zoom will bring up the dialog box where you can enter your question. Every panelist on the webinar will be monitoring that, so we'll be sure to get all the questions answered. We will try to get to as many questions during the allotted hour as our presenter goes, but there will be a 15-minute Q&A towards the end, and our presenter can stay a couple minutes after the allotted time if our questions do run over. We do now hold monthly webinars. So on the last Tuesday of the month at 1:30, there will be a webinar on a different topic each month, and we hope you guys can all join us. We do appreciate your feedback and will be sending out survey for your response after each webinar so that we can hopefully get you topics that interest you and tailor them towards what everyone here needs and wants. Before our presentation begins, I'd like to introduce CompuWorks founding partner, Alan Bowman.
Welcome, everybody. It's great to see a super good turnout for this session. We had a fantastic turnout for the first one that we did on Microsoft Teams in June. We thought this one might be a little bit of a tougher sell. You know, security is not always the topic that everybody wants to talk about, even though it's probably the thing that we all need to be talking about most often. This is a very, very important topic. So I'm glad so many of the CompuWorks community, clients, friends can be here. You know, with this session, we actually put it out to you guys to invite a friend if you felt like this would be useful content to them. And so I see a bunch of unfamiliar names here, and that's great. So welcome to all of you. I'm really happy to have Dave Hall on the call today. Dave, as many of you know, is the president of CompuWorks. He is my longtime business partner and also quite a bit of a security expert. So we're counting on him to weigh in. Maybe some real life examples of some of what Aaron is going to be talking about, and you know, certainly available for questions. So Dave, thanks for being here.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, all right. So we want to just dive right into this, but before we do that, we're going to launch a quick one question poll, and this is it. Have you ever been affected by a ransomware attack or security breach? And this will be a very interesting result as people get their votes in.
You really should say, have you been affected yet?
Well, that's, yeah, good point. Good point. Yeah,
we could make the argument, do you know you've been affected either as a company that got hit, had an impact on you, and you just don't know about it yet.
Yeah, there's a quote, a famous quote, I can't remember who said it, but there's two types of companies, either those that have been hacked or those that will be hacked. So, okay, we've got our poll results here, and I'm going to share those for everybody. So as you can see, it's about a 60-40 split, you know, about 38% of you have been affected in some way by a ransomware attack, and the other 62%, well, it's in your future apparently. So, but that's interesting. I mean, obviously huge numbers here. We all read the stories every day in the news, scary stuff. So, you know, security awareness is probably the single most important thing that everybody on this call can do to, you know, lower those numbers and reduce the risk of getting breached. So, interesting. And now, without further ado, I'm going to actually introduce the smart guy on the call today, the presenter, one of the smart guys in the call today. And Aaron Krauss is with us. He has 13 years of experience with educational design and delivery. He's an information security expert, has worked in the field for 15 years. He's got plenty of management and leadership experience. And his mission here is to translate complex risks into defined, measurable goals. So Aaron, it's really great to have you here today.
Well, Alan, thank you so much for the opportunity, and to everybody who's joined us, thank you as well. I do think this is one of those topics. I'm slightly biased, of course. It's been my the foundation of my career, but it is truly something that everyone at least needs to be aware of. Our lives are becoming increasingly digital. The work that we do, even if you are involved in any kind of physical construction or physical labor, there's an information system tracking some of the work that you do, tracking the payments for it, tracking the progress of whatever project you're working on. So at some point, information security awareness really will impact not only all of our lives, the work that we do, basically every aspect of existing nowadays. So definitely important to understand why security could be something that impacts you and how to, if at all possible, avoid one of those negative impacts. With that said, we're going to have basically a three-part structure today. We'll talk about some of the foundations of security awareness, what the actual problem is that we face, what's driving this. We'll talk about some basic steps that a business can take to secure themselves. And then also, most importantly, we will talk about the users. We've made systems that are very difficult to hack. Unfortunately, now people are the biggest target because we can trick them into doing things. We also have more people than we do information security controls. So making sure that everyone who interacts with this data, interacts with information systems, has a good understanding is going to be critically important. I like to start off with definitions. So one of the big things that you hear about nowadays is malware. This is a catch-all term. Basically, we smashed together the word malicious and software. This originally came from some Microsoft publications. It's basically any software that does something unintended, unwanted, typically designed to cause damage or disruption. These can be very targeted. It could be a single individual computer just to mess with somebody. It could be a network or a server that's in use by a foreign nation state, by a company. It could even be as narrowly targeted as a uranium enrichment facility running a specific type of uranium enrichment equipment with a particular language installed on the computer. So nation states are now using malware as a weapon of war. Of course, the nation states will deny that, but it's pretty easy to read between the lines there. But basically software designed to do something unwanted from the perspective of whoever's computer system is under attack. And that's really one of the big things that we need to be worried about. All the stuff that we hear about ransomware, the way that you get hit by ransomware is by having malware installed on your network, on your computer, by visiting a website or opening an attachment that had something that you did not actually want. I'm a numbers person. I like to think about how big is this problem compared to all of the other things that I have to worry about. How much time and effort should I be focusing on malware, on cybersecurity in general? 58% of attacks were against small businesses in a data set put together by Verizon. Every year they do a data breach investigation report. It's a fantastic read. It's actually very approachable, even if you don't have the same kind of background that I do. A lot of small businesses have an idea that just because they are not in the Fortune 500 or Fortune 100, they're not going to be an attack. Unfortunately, that is not true. And this number has been increasing year over year. Like I said, Verizon does the report annually. It's not so much that individual smaller organizations are being targeted because somebody wants to disrupt your business. They're doing what are known as spray and pray attacks. Attackers will send out phishing emails to millions of addresses, just hoping that they hit a couple of valid emails and the people actually open the attachments. It's not that your business is being specifically targeted. You're kind of getting caught in a dragnet type of operation there. If you should get hit, what is the financial impact? There's a data backup firm called Datto. Obviously for ransomware, you hopefully have backups that you can restore from. So they've actually done an analysis of some of the attacks that their customers have used their service to recover from. And somewhere around 50,000 was the average cost of downtime from a single attack. Now, for some businesses, a $50,000 loss, no big deal. For many of the small businesses that I've worked with, that could be the annual profit, that could be monthly revenues. That's a pretty big number when you start to put that in perspective of could your business continue to function if you had to pay that unexpectedly. Last but not least, from IBM, hopefully everybody knows who they are, 206 days was the average amount of time that it took a business to identify that a data breach had occurred. So nearly Nearly 2/3 of a year, the attackers were inside the network. They were able to do something before the business became aware of it. So think about all of the sensitive data that you have. Think about the things that somebody could do if they had access to your network for the better part of a year. I don't like to use fear, uncertainty, and doubt. I don't want to scare people into cybersecurity. My goal here is to frame this and put it into perspective. There are obviously lots of things that as a business owner, you need to focus on, making sure that you're serving customers, making sure that you keep the operations running, keep the lights on, keep your inventory well stocked. Cybersecurity is one small part of that. And these numbers are designed to help you balance against those operational concerns. How much time and effort and resources should you put into your cybersecurity efforts? Of course, working in cybersecurity, I always want a bigger budget, but I also recognize as a business leader, I can't have unlimited resources. To further frame the problem, it helps to look at some of the incentives or drivers that attackers, sometimes known as bad actors, I like to be a little pejorative and call them miscreants. What's actually driving them? What's incentivizing them to do this stuff? We have a couple of sort of pairs here of ways that the bad guys can get access to information and then what they can actually do with it. So data mining is one. It's often an unobtrusive activity. This is an activity undertaken by attackers. May also be known as open source intelligence or OSINT. Basically, attackers are gathering information, whether it's personal data, whether it is company information, which might be useful in and of itself or might be useful for a further attack. Knowing who your C-level executives are, knowing who is in the organization and what types of technology they work on, because people put that in their LinkedIn profile, can actually be very useful to craft an attack, like ransomware. Based on the type of technology in use, attackers could craft a ransomware attack designed to disable those specific systems. Of course, as the name implies, ransomware, the attackers are then going to demand payment in order to unlock access to your data or systems. This is typically going to rely on some type of flaw or vulnerability in the underlying operating system or in the applications that your business is using. Interestingly enough, ransomware is actually an application of a security control for malicious purposes. We talk about encryption as a way to protect data. In a ransomware attack, the attackers are encrypting your data and then charging you money for the key needed to decrypt the data. We typically use encryption as a way to block people from gaining access to information that they are not authorized to see by not giving them a copy of the key. The ransomware attackers have actually flipped the script on us here. Another attack is known as a botnet. This is where the attackers gain access to data or systems, oftentimes without the knowledge of the people who they are attacking. So somebody visits a malicious website, they receive an email, they are either tricked or fooled into downloading some malicious software. Their computer is then compromised and can be used by the attackers for malicious purposes. I think I may have had a screen issue here, bear with. I lost a second monitor here, just a moment. Gonna get back to PowerPoint, hopefully. Here we go.
The joys of live webinars.
Here we go. Okay, back to the slides. So in a botnet, once your computer has been compromised, it can then be used to perform additional malicious activities under the control of the attackers. So we often see these used in what are known as denial of service attacks. Basically, a network of compromised computers are used to send massive amounts of traffic against a website. There's actually an information security magazine called InfoSec magazine that is experiencing one of these right now. Their website has received so much traffic that it has basically crashed. People can't access it legitimately because the servers hosting that website have been overwhelmed. Underlying incentive for many of these attacks is basically malice. This is why I like to call these folks miscreants. They have malicious intent, going after either human weaknesses or software vulnerabilities to see what they can disrupt, to see what they might be able to do, whether that is extracting money from people, whether it is taking a website offline just for the fun of it, or because that website is hosting material that they have some sort of philosophical or political disagreement with. Those are all of the backgrounds of common vulnerabilities that we face. These vulnerabilities are coupled with threats, and that's what actually presents a cybersecurity risk. So we're going to take a look at some of the common threats as well. Phishing is one of them that you should have hopefully heard of. If you haven't, phishing is actually what's known as a social engineering attack. You are getting somebody to do something that they otherwise would not do. Open a malicious attachment and install malicious software. Obviously, most folks are not going to download a virus and install it on the computer that they're sitting in front of and give bad guys access to that computer. So a phishing scam, again, social engineering, you're tricking somebody into taking action that they otherwise would not, typically with the goal of acquiring sensitive information, gaining access to passwords and usernames, credit card or bank details, possibly even getting people to redirect payments, invoice, or what's known as funds transfer fraud. Phishing campaigns have gotten very sophisticated lately. The emails actually look genuine. They look like they come from popular social media websites, from banks, delivery companies, or even business partners that you as a small business interact with. Your users might receive a message that looks like it comes from a business partner asking for an invoice to be redirected to a different payment account this month. There's been a change at the bank. Someone new in the accounts receivable department asking for payment information to be updated. And guess what? If you follow those instructions, you've basically just paid an invoice to a malicious firm, not the legitimate business partner who you interact with. And that money, if you don't recover it quickly, is gone forever.
Just to add on to what Aaron is saying, we recommend that businesses set up a policy for wire transfers that you will never ask, an executive will never ask for these in an email, that they'll make a personal connection of some way, and then you'll be able to verify that with another executive, so that your company isn't tricked into wiring money or any ACH or any sort of account changes. And I think that's an excellent policy.
For anyone in the financial industry, you may have heard of dual control. Basically, you need two people to each take independent action to approve something. Great example of a way that you can help catch these. You get two sets of eyes to see if something looks fishy. You have two sets of eyes and two sets of processes that have to be followed to verify any of these requests. Out of the breaches in the 2019 Verizon data breach report, a little over 60% of them involved phishing, involved social engineering attacks like phishing, as well as the next type of attack that we're going to talk about, which is spear phishing. But ways that you can help to spot this, good point of training for your users, for everybody in the organization. When looking at an email, be on the lookout for something that seems too good to be true. Unfortunately, the attackers have gotten very sophisticated, so they've started to incorporate trusted company logos, color schemes, messages that actually look like they come from a legitimate company that you might be familiar with. There are going to be some red flags, however. There may be a generic introduction. You may receive a dear sir or madam, where before you were addressed by name or by the title or with some identifying information like an account number. The message may also contain a link or an attachment that you weren't expecting. Those links may point to a suspicious URL, and I have a story to share here in just a second. Most importantly, there's going to be a prompt for some urgent or weird type of request. Please send money urgently, or your account will be shut down. Please log in and verify details, or you will lose access. Please put together some gift cards and send them as a form of payment, something that you wouldn't normally be requested to do. The prompt user action and the suspicious URL, actually at the beginning of the COVID pandemic, when we were all stuck inside our houses for who knew how long, I got an email that looked 100% genuine, looked like it came from Netflix, had the right logo, the right color scheme, had all of the legal information and the unsubscribe button down at the bottom. And they said they couldn't process my credit card payment and I was going to lose access to my streaming services, which, being stuck inside, what else did I have to do, right? So of course I'm going to click on this button. Of course I'm going to update my credit card. But the button to update my credit card information pointed to a site that was hosted in Luxembourg. I live in the US. I'm pretty sure that my Netflix account is based in the US. So that Luxembourg address was a little bit suspicious. And of course, turned out to be a phishing email. Netflix would not have threatened to cut off access. They would have said, your payment failed. Please log into your Netflix account and update it. So very clever, very crafty phishing campaign sent out, obviously exploiting a social condition that made me a little bit more susceptible to taking that immediate action without being as suspicious of the message. It's very tough sometimes to talk. Oh, go ahead, Dave.
So there's 99 ways to hack into a network, but realistically, there are just 2 ways that if you can prevent those 2 ways from happening, you can eliminate most of the attacks. And it's either a phishing email that comes in that tries to trick you into clicking on a link, opening an attachment, following some sort of action, or you go by a website that's been infected with malware, and it tries to trick you into entering credentials or loading some software on there. And if you can educate your users into how to identify these attacks and have them at least suspect that there might be something wrong with that email and ask someone, and also create a culture in your company where people are not afraid to ask about an email and bring it to someone's attention, or even to let them know, oh, I accidentally gave away my credentials. If they let us know in 5 minutes, this is of no consequence at all. If they are afraid to tell anyone, you are going to have a really bad day on Monday. And that's the kind of culture that you want to create. You don't want to punish people, penalize them. You want them bringing this information forward as rapidly as possible and allowing experts to rectify the situation quickly. But just a small point there.
Yeah, we're all susceptible. I've been working in this industry for quite a few years, and even I occasionally get a message that if it weren't the fact that I'm super suspicious, I probably would have followed the action, but just there's a tiny little voice, and that's with 15 years of this being my day-to-day life.
Yep.
Can't
Given
expect
enough of
everybody
a
in the company to have the
coincidence,
same focus.
Enough of a coincidence, anyone can be fooled.
Further complicating matters is what's known as spear phishing. So this is actually a targeted type of a phishing attack. Couple of definitions here. It can be targeted at a specific individual. It may also target a specific department. We'll often see accounting or finance departments fall victim to spear phishing. We've also started to see entire companies who are being directly targeted by phishing. Kind of crosses the line between how targeted is it versus, again, sort of a net, but it's a message that's going to be very specific to your organization, to your business, using those details that the attackers have gathered about your business in particular. A very common method of conducting a spear phishing attack is to use a similar email domain that's very easy to overlook. If you are acme.com and someone registers acme-inc.com, that looks like it might be legitimate. If the company's name is Acme Inc., that might fly under the radar for people who are not, again, super suspicious about the messages that they receive. Just like the regular phishing emails, spear phishing is still an attempt to steal confidential information or gain access to a network. Some common traits of these attacks that you should be training your employees to look out for, they're typically going to target either specific companies or, again, those specific employees. So you may have departments or individuals like the C-suite who need to be a little bit more cautious around opening emails, around taking actions, or to Dave's point, you may want to structure your business processes in such a way that these folks actually have a little bit of backup, that one person in the finance department can't transfer money fraudulently without a second person, a second set of eyes looking over. Spear phishing requires reconnaissance. It requires the attackers to gather that information. So you may also look at some policies you can put in place, preventing information from getting out there. You may ask people to be a little bit vague in their LinkedIn profiles rather than listing all the specific versions of Linux software that they are responsible for supporting. Just say that they are a Linux or Unix administrator. Spear phishing, unfortunately, also is using sort of multimodal communications. So it may involve not just emails, but also the good old fake Microsoft technical support scam. Somebody calling you on the phone saying they're with the help desk, asking you to share your password so they can log in and do some remote support on your computer. That is 100% going to be false. That is something you should absolutely train your users to never give out that information. Good policy or procedure to put in place there. If a call like that is received, don't give out any information, hang up, and call back on a trusted number. Call the help desk on the number that you know is legitimate and ask, was this a legitimate request, or did I fall victim to a scam? Obviously, don't give out any information. Most concerning, many of the spear phishing attacks that have been successful have actually come from an account that has previously been compromised. So this is coming from a trusted person who you have interacted with in the past. If their email account has been compromised, messages are going to be sent from that account. So in this case, it does come from someone who you've communicated with in the past, who you have built a trust relationship. Again, looking out for weird requests, a sense of urgency, or asking you to go around or violate longstanding process or procedure, kind of work around that. A message from the CEO asking for PayPal credentials at 2 o'clock in the morning, typically not something that you're going to expect to see. However, if the CEO's account has been hacked, many people, of course, are going to respond to that because they want to keep the CEO happy, because the management chain, you want to comply with those requests. The attackers are actually working or leveraging that. They're actually using this as part of the attack.
So I have another story, Aaron, on spear phishing. This one, a technique was brand new to me, but very interesting. So we had a new employee come on, and she got an email that pretended it was from me. The email address was not correct, but keep in mind, this is a brand new employee. Now, fortunately, she had already taken her security training and knew what to look for. And the request was, it seemed odd to her. I'm not sure if I was asking for iTunes cards or for her to call or email me back immediately. Don't call. There's always a, don't try to call me. I'm in a meeting. And she knew right away something was up and asked a few questions. And then she subsequently got 2 more emails from other people in the company. And I thought this was interesting. We traced it down to her letting people know on LinkedIn that she had a new job. And they linked the company and then to a number of us within the company. And I can only imagine at this point that this is not an automated artificial intelligence gathering of information, that they actually have people combing through LinkedIn, looking for that information, and then manually connecting it with other pieces of information. It had my full name in there and title and everything else. And I thought it was fascinating because you can see how much more resources they have these days. They're not sending out generic campaigns, that they're actually, spending some time targeting a campaign, and particularly on a vulnerable user, a brand new user. Unfortunately, she was able to thwart their campaign, and she also did not reply to the email, which is very important. If you get an email, even if you think it's from a legitimate source, but you have questions about the authenticity of it, call that source. Don't send them an email, because you'll be talking to the hackers at that point, and they'll also know that your email is being monitored by a real person, and you'll be targeted for other attacks. So pick up the phone and give them a call and say, did you send out this email with this strange attachment? And get the story from the end user directly.
Unfortunately, this goes back to that incentives. At this point, cybercrime is a business that's actually being run like a business. So absolutely, they have folks doing this. They also have artificial intelligence and big data combing publicly available LinkedIn posts and information and highlighting users who might be more vulnerable to attack because they've recently had a job change. That is that process that I mentioned, known as OSINT, open source intelligence, basically gathering information from open sources like LinkedIn, like social media. And again, it's not just an individual cyber criminal, it is cybercrime enterprises that are doing this, and they have the same tools and resources that we use to drive our businesses. Customer relationship management, big data that gathers all this information and highlights where somebody might be more vulnerable to attack on the malicious side, or where somebody might be more likely to purchase a piece of software or be interested in consulting services on the legitimate side. That information is pulled together. Unfortunately, some of this can actually be automated, so the economics of it are even more attractive. Once you have those names and people lined up in the campaign, you can use an automated email generator, and then that is used to launch a phishing attack. And again, these are dragnet style operations. The cost to do all of this is a few $1,000s. If they can get $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 misdirected into the wrong account, it makes sense to do this. Again, the economics just make sense.
Aaron,
similar situation I was in.
Oh, sorry. We have a question that sort of ties into this a little bit. Is there a way to protect an email address on a website? The problem is, if you put your employees' email addresses on your website, they will be gathered by hackers and targeted. So we always advise people not to put that on there. And the follow-up question, is there a way to mask that that email so that the hackers won't pick it up. And the technique that I've always used, and maybe Aaron has some additional details on this, is I'll say, if you'd like to email, Bill Smith, his email will be his first initial and last name, along with our URL, which is CompuWorks.biz. And so I'm hoping that the machine isn't sophisticated enough to decipher that, and that a human would easily be able to decipher that. Maybe you've got some other insight on that, Aaron?
Yeah, I'm a little less concerned about that just because there have been so many of these email marketing services that have had data breaches, and their business is compiling these massive data sets of email addresses, your business title, where you work, what industry and seniority level you're in. We've seen a couple of those over the last 2 or 3 years, and they have manually pulled a lot of this information, built these databases. They have algorithms that create all possible variations: first initial last name, first initial dot last name, first name dot last name. So those email addresses are already out there. It's public information at this point, so I'm not super worried about that. The standard technique that I see a lot of folks use, instead of making a live email address, they'll have the first part of the email address, and then they put some information in brackets so that a computer reading that doesn't recognize it as a valid email address, but a human can obviously make the correct changes to remove the brackets and make it a live address. Slightly fatalistic view there, but yeah, that information at this point is out there, so not sure how much effort you should put into protecting it.
So you've given up, Aaron.
I haven't given up. I'm just focusing my limited resources on more important things that I can protect, like credit card data, like financial information that is not already public. So final thought on that same thing that you had mentioned, Dave. I worked for a startup. We announced a round of funding. Within 24 hours, we were hit by one of the PayPal phishing schemes. Looked like it came from the CEO. And it was just because that information had been announced publicly. We put out a press release saying that we had closed a seed round of funding. And somebody in, I think it was Lithuania or Latvia, pretending to be our CEO, was asking employees to share PayPal credentials.
And did they?
Nobody fell for it. Everybody reported it. That was a great learning exercise for all of us. We had some real world information to use in our next round of security awareness training. Quick number here. Don't want to spend too much time on it because I want to get to how you can help to avoid all of these things. But out of a report from Symantec, we saw a little bit under 2/3 of attacks in this particular data set coming out of Symantec. Spear-phishing was one of the primary infection vectors. By that, we mean it was the way that the attackers made their way into the organization. Somebody fell for a spear-phishing, again, a targeted phishing email. So people may think, again, I'm not going to be a target. I'm a small fish, if you will, in a very small company. Of course, I'm not going to be targeted. Unfortunately, you will. People need to understand the potential consequences here. You could have downtime as a business. The business could suffer reputation damage as well as unpredictable expenses to recover from an attack. So people need to be aware. Yes, email is a valid business, a valuable business tool that can be used. Unfortunately, it can also be a target of attack. So people need to be a little bit aware of that, a little bit vigilant when interacting with messages. Be on the lookout for those signs. We're going to take a look now, second section, 4 ways to secure your work environment. And then again, second part of this is how to build the human firewall, things that you can do to help your employees be more secure. When we talk about securing a work environment, there are really a couple of things that you can do that are going to offer some very broad protection and don't require a huge amount of effort. These are just some basic, what I like to think of as cyber hygiene type of activities. First and most importantly is updating and patching software. You can have the fanciest panes of glass with all of the security data in the world and artificial intelligence monitoring your network. All of those things are going to be rendered useless if you have outdated software that has security vulnerabilities which attackers can use to gain a foothold in your network. These vulnerabilities are well known, they are documented. There are actually toolkits that automate the process of attacking vulnerable software by trying every possible attack against vulnerabilities. It's trivial to do these things, so updating and patching software, I truly cannot stress how important that is and how valuable it is in terms of the cost-benefit trade-off. How much effort it takes to implement these patches, versus how much security protection they offer. If you're dealing with any kind of sensitive data, which at this point can include even things like email addresses, if you are regulated by different privacy regulations, data protection best practices are really going to be crucial. Obviously, having up-to-date security software in place. Your security software should be like any other piece of software. You should update it as frequently as possible, whether that's updating the actual software itself or the files that it uses, sometimes known as definition files, particularly for things like antivirus and anti-malware. This is the library that those things use to check files, to look for malware on the network. Those should be kept up to date as frequently as possible as well. You should also make sure that all of the components of your IT environment, sometimes known as an IT stack, everything that comprises the computing environment that you use needs to be kept up to date, needs to be hardened and secured. So that includes your network infrastructure, things like routers, if you are using third-party services like a cloud service provider, software as a service, or if you are hosting anything in a cloud environment on an infrastructure or platform as a service, all of these things need to be up to date and secured as much as possible. From a data protection standpoint as well, even outside of technology, one of the best things that you can do, if you don't need the information, don't have it on your network. If it's useful for a limited amount of time, but you don't need to keep it available all the time, archive or delete it. If it's information that you don't need in the first place, do not collect it. And this still confounds me today after 15 years in the industry, seeing some of the data breaches where information was stolen by an attacker from a business. And the simple question is, why did that business need social security numbers or social insurance numbers in Canada? Why did they need to store credit card information even after my transaction had been processed? There was no valid business need for it. Storing that information is actually putting your business at risk. So great risk management activity, avoid the risk altogether. If you have a domain—
By the way, Aaron, that's also step one on complying with the mass privacy regulations, is after you've identified private information, do you really need to store it? And we often found, here, that we were storing information. Why are we storing this stuff? And we removed it off our network and took out a big chunk of the privacy regulations that applied to us.
It blows my mind sometimes. If I handed you $10 million worth of gold and said, you can't steal this, but you have to hold on to it and protect it. And oh, by the way, it's in a see-through backpack, so everybody's going to know that you have it and they're going to come after you and try to steal it. I wouldn't accept that. Why would you do the same thing with data? I think we struggle sometimes because you can't actually see it. It's not a physical shiny object that we know is inherently valuable, but exact same thing applies. If you lose 10 million social security records, it's the same thing as losing an equivalent amount of gold. Another technical thing that you can do, make sure that you have your domain under management. Your domain is whatever .com you use for your website, your email. If you have multiple of these, you should be applying best practices across all of them. Make sure that the contact information for your domain is current. Also make sure that you've configured the security around your domain so that it cannot be transferred to another party, so they can't hijack it. Depending on what type of business you're in, might also suggest monitoring for some lookalike domains. Again, if you're acme.com, keep an eye out and see if anybody has registered acme-inc.com, or if you are Acme Widgets, acmewidgets.com, see if somebody's registered acmewidget.com. Oftentimes we'll see these as a precursor to a phishing attack. Somebody registers that domain and then sends emails that at first glance look like they might come from a legitimate business, but of course, it's coming from a malicious domain. It's coming from somebody who's pretending to be you. Another good step for securing your work environment is to implement robust authentication. And when we talk about authentication, unfortunately, what we're most talking about here are passwords. I know everybody absolutely loves these things. Interestingly enough, in the last 10 years, there's been a complete shift in the guidance on passwords. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the old 8 characters, uppercase, lowercase, special characters, and numbers. Unfortunately, those are actually spectacularly insecure. They're very easy for computers to guess and very difficult for people to remember. Because people need to remember them, it's actually not a great password policy. So there is actually a standard, it's called NIST 800-63B, that covers authentication and provides some more modern guidance on passwords that thankfully actually make these easier for people to remember and harder for computers to guess. So those automated attacks are going to be less successful and your users are going to be happier. This may sound a little bit scary, 12 or more characters, but the reality is we have the ability to use what are known as passphrases. In general, complexity, more character sets that you can include, it's going to be better, but a longer passphrase is always going to be better than a shorter password. So an entire sentence with no punctuation and no numbers, something that's going to be easy for somebody to remember. Maybe it's their favorite movie quote or an inside joke, very easy to remember, but because of the sheer number of characters, very difficult for a computer to guess. So a 64 character passphrase that, let's say maybe it's your wedding vows or a movie quote from your favorite movie, actually going to be more secure than that 8 character uppercase, lowercase, special character password that you used to create. The other important thing that makes users happier, it's only required to reset passwords if you are sure that it has, if you have a reason to suspect that it has been breached. So if a passcode, password, or passphrase has not been stolen, if you have no reason to believe that it's been breached, there's no requirement to change it. So that old guidance of changing passwords every 30 days has also been retired. We also look at storage and encryption, and this is where we recommend using a password manager, which we're going to talk about in a few slides from now. Basically, because people have these longer passwords to remember, put them into a password manager, put them into a secure vault, and store them under encryption, which is where the password manager comes into play. When we talk about authentication, passwords are one example. That is a factor known as type 1, something that you know, like a password. We also have type 2, something that you have, like a trusted device, a smartphone, or an authentication key. The third authentication type is a measurement of something you are, a fingerprint, facial scan, basically biometrics. Multi-factor authentication requires more than one of these factors in order to complete a login. So this is where you have to provide both a password as well as a 6-digit code that comes from an Authenticator app on a trusted smartphone. Multi-factor authentication at this point is becoming table stakes. It is becoming a basic security best practice for access to sensitive systems or information. You do have some flexibility in configuring this. If somebody logs into their computer every day at 9 o'clock in the morning from the exact same location, probably don't need to require multi-factor authentication every single morning. If all of a sudden, instead of 9 a.m., they're logging in from China at 2 a.m., that's a significant change. That is something where you might want to make sure that that truly is the user who you expect. You might throw up that extra authentication factor requirement. Could be a user who's traveling, could also be somebody who has stolen that user's credentials and is trying to gain unauthorized access. So that's known as conditional. Multi-factor, you can also do geo-filtering. If people log in from the office network, MFA is not required. If they log in from somewhere else, MFA is required. Particularly in Microsoft 365, you have that conditional MFA that you can configure. So definitely look into that as a good way to balance inconvenience to your users with increased security. And Dave, I think you had something to share here around MFA.
I do. So we had a customer where we were migrating their email to Office 365. And the customer said, do I really have to set up this MFA for all my employees? And I said, yes, it's required. Not less than a month later, she calls me up in a panic. She goes, I fell for an email. I clicked on it and I gave up my Office 365 credentials. And I said, I have a confession to make. When I told you you didn't need FMA or that you had to put FMA on there, I lied. It's an option. And she goes, well, thank God you lied to me. But it really was the difference between her giving up her credentials and being hacked and having emails sent to her entire address book or going through a nightmare there to it was really a very little consequence. Check that password, make sure if you're using it somewhere else that you change it because they'll try your email and password combination at Facebook and LinkedIn and everywhere else. But other than that, it was really of no consequence. So the days are over of no MFA on your hosted financial system. It's the same as you wouldn't leave your keys in your car and your door's unlocked. We have to take the precaution. This is the way the world works now. But it's a terrific a security mechanism. It's
Yeah,
really,
I think in the old physical security, it's the equivalent of having one key for the deadbolt and one key for the knob, and that way, if you lose one, obviously people don't have everything that they need to break into your house. So, like I said, MFA at this point I consider to be table stakes. I want to make sure we leave enough room for questions here, so we're going to go quickly into the best practices for users, basically making sure that you build that human firewall. Your biggest security asset are going to be your users. Unfortunately, the biggest, what's known as attack surface, the things that could be attacked to gain access, also your users. So making sure users are trained and have adequate skills and knowledge is going to be crucial. Building the human firewall, you can do some very important and very basic things like offering annual cybersecurity awareness training, as well as training all new employees. I would also encourage simulated testing and engagement around security topics. So if you've trained people on how to spot phishing emails, run a phishing simulation and see if people really got the message. I want to be very, very clear here. These are teachable moments. I have seen all too many instances where companies have fired or penalized people who fell for a phishing simulation. That is not the user's fault. That indicates a gap in knowledge, a gap in skills or resources. It could also honestly just indicate that people are overworked and don't have the time to analyze each email to the level of detail. And that is a risk that you as a business can control by making sure that people's workloads are realistic, by making sure if you need to bring on additional resources, so that people have the time to more carefully analyze the emails rather than being so stressed out that they just read and respond to whatever hits their inbox. Also, something that you can do, which I've seen many businesses fail at, is make sure that your security policies are actually enforced. If you require people to report security incidents or potential incidents and they don't because they're too lazy or they haven't been properly trained, you're not enforcing that policy. You might as well not have written it at all. And of course, that security policy is not being effective at reducing your cyber risk. Again, you wasted money by writing the policy if you're not going to enforce it, if it's not effective throughout the organization. Because we have all these passwords and passphrases and we have multi-factor authentication to juggle, I think at this point, I'm comfortable saying that a password manager is a recommended best practice. I think I might also pull a Dave here and tell people that it's a requirement, even if it truly isn't, just because of the security benefits that it offers. And from a cost perspective, these are not expensive at all and offer a great amount of protection. Couple of recommendations. LastPass is one of my favorites. There are others, Dashlane and 1Password. If you're looking into these, relatively similar in terms of price point and feature set. If you don't have a password manager, a couple of tips that you can use to keep your credentials safe if you have to manage them manually. Reusing passwords is an absolute no-no. If one service is breached, the username and password that is exposed is going to be used by attackers to try to log into other services. So if your Gmail password is compromised, I can guarantee you that the attackers will try to log into Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, other sites with that same password. If possible, try to avoid standard substitutions, switching out an A for the @ sign. The attackers know this and they do that when guessing passwords. And make sure that you're not using any easily guessed or easily identified passwords based on publicly available information about you, like your birth date, like your name. In general, longer passwords or passphrases are going to be better than shorter ones. And if you can, try to use a random password generator. All of the password managers offer an online random password generator that you can use, even if you're not using their password manager software. Train your users on Wi-Fi best practices. Make sure that people are aware that if they are on a public Wi-Fi network, it does not have privacy. They should use that Wi-Fi accordingly. The type of information that they access should be appropriate for information that they want publicly visible. Make sure that people are also aware of how to spot copycat networks. It's very easy to set up a Wi-Fi network in a coffee shop or a restaurant and get people to connect to it. Once you're connected to that network, whoever set up that fake network can monitor the traffic. So some best practices around that: if the restaurant has posted a sign with the Wi-Fi information, or make sure that you ask a server or somebody who works there for the correct Wi-Fi network. Don't just connect to something that looks legit. I have mixed feelings about this one just because from a personal standpoint, it's a pain in the you-know-what, but in general, auto-connecting to networks is not a best practice because, again, it's very easy to set up a network that looks like a Hilton or a Starbucks or a pizza chain. And then when people are traveling or out and about, their phone will automatically connect to it. Being connected to a network means that your device is potentially at risk of being hacked. In general, auto connect is not a great option. Again, just from a personal standpoint, I don't always enforce this myself because it's an extra overhead. I have to go and connect to a network manually. Of course, whenever you're out and about, a password protected network is, of course, going to be preferred. So whatever device you're on, when you're connecting to the Wi-Fi network, look for that little lock icon next to it. And again, the key takeaway here is training your users to follow these best practices when connecting to Wi-Fi. At the beginning of pandemic, I gave a couple of presentations saying that I think remote work or work from home, distributed work, whatever you want to call it, is here to stay. My own office has gone from being able to accommodate everyone to a much smaller footprint because we now have people all over the country, and I don't think we're going to go back to everyone in the office. So this is a key takeaway of some best practices for securing work from home or distributed work environments. A lot of this is the same stuff that you would implement in an office environment, but it needs to be packaged up and reflected to wherever people are working, whether that's from home or a co-working facility or out on the road. Obviously, keeping software and devices up to date, installing those security updates, making sure that your Wi-Fi network is properly secured with advanced security. It's known as WPA2 or WPA3. That's what your computer or your tablet or your phone actually uses to put that little lock icon that says this is a secured network. If your users don't know how to configure that, your IT department might want to do some one-on-one work with the users to figure out how to secure their home equipment. If you do have folks who are mobile, if you don't have the ability to secure all of the different network devices that they're using, a virtual private network or VPN to securely connect to resources is a great way to basically ignore the security of those network devices because you're creating a secure virtual network. So people can join a public non-password protected network and not have to worry about their information being intercepted. Of course, similar to what people did in the office, being mindful of what they download, being mindful of what they open or click on, and making sure that you have remote work or distributed work security policies and procedures implemented throughout the organization. Password managers as well as antivirus. Again, similar best practices to what you had in the office. Same thing with enforcing multi-factor authentication. Final takeaway here. At the beginning of pandemic, I actually worked with a lot of IT departments to figure out how they could offer resources instead of focused on securing an office environment, implementing all of these best practices on the equipment that they controlled, figuring out how to do that for these home workers. If people have common Wi-Fi equipment, whether it's from Netgear or Linksys, or equipment that comes from an ISP, whether you have Comcast or Verizon, finding the security documentation for the equipment that your users are using, putting together a checklist of best practices for securing that equipment in the home office environment, making that available one-on-one sessions with employees to implement that if they need a little bit of help, kind of changing the role of the IT professionals from managing information technology directly under their control to being more consultative partners, again, for those home offices or for those folks who are on the go. Which brings us to questions. And I know that I saw a couple of questions, I think, that popped up in the chat. Kaylee, anything that was high priority, or can we just go through those in
Before we get
order
to
they came in?
questions, I wanted to let people know that we've put together a cyber profile protection worksheet that's available to all of the participants in the in this seminar. And you can just contact us. Our final slide actually listed, but it's very specific, actionable items that you can do to lock down your cyber profile and make sure that you're giving away as little information as possible online and through your social media accounts, and various best practices to do. Take you a couple hours to go through it, but I think you'll be able to tidy up your cyber profile a little bit. So anybody who needs that, the final slide tells you how to get it.
And we'll put that up here in a couple seconds. Kaylee, looking through the chat, I see that there was a specific question here. Employees not wanting to use personal cell phones for MFA. Is there an alternative because the phone call to an office phone doesn't always work? Unfortunately, my best alternative there would be the Authenticator applications that you can put on a cell phone. Unlike having mobile or having email on a personal device, it doesn't really put any sensitive data. Doesn't usually give the company the ability to like remotely wipe your device or lock it.
Google
apps are free.
Authenticator is a good example of that, Google Authenticator. And it's
Microsoft
also nice to
Authenticator
work
as well.
if you don't have an internet connection or any kind of cell phone access, you still get the code.
I'm not sure that overcomes the resistance to using a personal device, but I think the sales pitch that I would use there again is it does not give the company any control over that device. It's no cost to the employees. It's literally just a free app that they download, and it generates a 6-digit code when they open it, which is what they enter for their MFA, and those should work.
The one technique that we've found helpful is you can set a policy in your office that if you're not using an MFA on your email, that you have to come into the office to get your email. And we found that that's helpful in getting people to accept the MFA because it restricts where they can get their email quite a bit.
All right, any other questions out there?
I saw a question in Valerie, just to make your life easier. I actually typed in the chat the password managers. So if you want to copy and paste that, or I think you can save the chat from the webinar as well to refer back to.
Great. Those were the only two I saw from the chat. There is one in the Q&A from Seth.
And I love this one. Seth, great question. How do we prevent ransomware from infecting daily or monthly backups? So we talk about offline or off-site backups, making sure that the backup data cannot be reached. Basically taking a backup from a server on your network and storing it on another server on the network. Unfortunately, the ransomware that we see nowadays just looks for anything that it can find to lock up connected to a network. So taking those backups off of the network, storing them somewhere else. You can use a cloud backup service. You could actually write them onto hard drives and take them to an alternate facility, because those are physically offline and physically separated from the network that might be hit by ransomware. It's typically not going to be possible for that data to be infected. Now, of course, if you have files that have been locked up with ransomware and you back them up without knowing it, that's obviously not going to be effective. So the other factor there would be how long you're keeping backups before you overwrite them. So your backup schedule, as well as that offsite or offline storage, are going to be good ways to hopefully prevent ransomware from infecting your backup files, so that you have valid data to back up from should you be hit by ransomware.
And modern backup and disaster recovery solutions are really built to do this kind of thing. There was a quote from a company called Dado earlier on, which is as an example of one of those companies. And anybody that has works with us via our Healthy IT program has that device. So I also wanted to make one other point here. I know we're getting close to wrapping up. So for all of those folks out there who are clients who participate in our managed IT program, our Healthy IT program, which is not all of our clients, but many of them do, you have available as part of that service ongoing security awareness training. And you absolutely should be taking advantage of that. If you're not familiar with what that is, ask. You can send us an email to the help desk. We'll get you pointed in the right direction. But it's absolutely critical that you take advantage of that. It's easily digestible weekly micro training sessions with a 4-question quiz, and you develop an employment security awareness score over time, and your company builds a security awareness score as well. So it's really, really important to participate in that. And if you're not, please reach out and we'll help get you going.
I will say too, we were recently involved in the forensics of a hack, a ransomware attack. And in my opinion, the hackers did not intend for this company to recover from this attack. They trashed that network, and they could have had all the unencryption codes that they needed, and it still wouldn't have been all that useful in getting the information back. And they recovered because we got a number of people on site, and we were able to go to their backups, which were not touched. They were off the network, and we restored them within a day. but they just trashed that network. And I think that pipeline company that got hacked, the president alluded to that, even though they paid an enormous ransom, they said that it did very little good in getting their data back, that they had to do quite a bit of work to recover the networks. So that's the thing these days, is you might as well even bother to pay the ransom, in my opinion.
Unfortunately, as cybercrime has turned into a business, little bit of a curmudgeonly take here, but once they have your money, of course, they don't really need to provide customer service. There's no incentive. No one is giving reputation scores to cybercriminal gangs. So even if the decryption tools don't work or only work part way, it's not like you can apply for a refund. It's not like you're going to leave a Yelp review of the cybercrime gang because other people might want to avoid them in the future. The economics of it are, once they have your money, even if the tool doesn't work to decrypt all of your data, leaves you high and dry, you really don't have much of a recourse there.
I've heard some really scary statistics on that. One of the surveys I saw said something like only about 8% of the people that paid the ransom actually recovered all of their data. All right, so I think we're running out of time here. It doesn't look like we have any more questions. So just a few things to wrap up with. So as Dave mentioned, the Cyber Profile Protection Worksheet is a really valuable checklist. If anybody's interested in getting that, just shoot us an email at training@compuworks.biz. We'll make sure you get a copy of that. We are going to send out a post-session email. In that email, we'll have a very brief survey. If you can give us some feedback, as Kaylee mentioned, it's really helpful for us. We want to try to tailor these sessions to be interesting to you. As part of the CompuWorks community, we're really looking for that input to help us plan future sessions. There will also be a recording of this session available via that email. So if you have colleagues or friends that weren't able to attend and you think this would be valuable to them, please feel free to share that email. We will also include in the follow-up email the ability to register for the next session. And again, Microsoft 365 Cloud Tools is the topic. It's the 4th Tuesday of August, and really it's the 4th Tuesday of every month at 1:30 that we'll be running these sessions. And unless anybody else has anything to add, I think we're ready to wrap up. All right, well, thank you everybody for being here. Great turnout. That's really encouraging for us. This is an important topic. So we hope to see you all here next month.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.